Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, and in today's video I'm going to be going over everything you will need to know for F1 Fantasy going into the Monaco Grand Prix. Now there's a lot to talk about, but before we get into that, let's have a look at my team last weekend. And in Imola, it was a bit of a mixed bag for me, at least, taking a -10 to get over to the team. Yes, the team performed better than the Verstappen team I would have had, however with the -10 it didn't work out that way, overall -8. However, because it was such a low scoring week, it didn't matter too much. The most people got was around 200 to 220, and then if you were really unlucky, around 140 to 150 points. So to get around 180 points was okay, and with this foundation of a team, move on to hopefully a very good Monaco Grand Prix. But like always, to stay in the loop for any F1 Fantasy news, I'll be talking about F1 Fantasy on Twitter. I have a Discord server, I'll link in the description, where you can get your questions answered by me or other like-minded people on F1 Fantasy. Join my league as well, we've got 650 people in it at the minute. And of course, like and subscribe if you like what you see. So thank you so much, and let's get straight into the video. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is obviously the track. And that is because it is the Monaco Grand Prix. There are 0 overtakes. Now, last season there was 22. Considering 2022 had 13, 2021 had 0, and 2019 had 2 overtakes. So we know going into Monaco there's not a lot of overtakes. But that means F1 Fantasy wise, we have to think about things a little bit different to how we normally do. Because normally we love those overtakes, positioned, gained points. However, there's not going to be many in Monaco. So it's also very much going to come down to the strategies being used, safety cars being deployed, and if teams just don't screw up. Yes, I'm looking at you, Ferrari. You better not screw up in Monaco again. But then going on from this, I think the main thing we need to talk about for this weekend is driver of the day and fastest lap points, because you get 10 points for each of these categories. However, they are so important for races where you don't get overtakes, because yes, we can't perfectly compare Imola and Monaco together. However, we know they're both low overtake tracks. So Imola, low scoring teams. We know in Monaco there's not going to be many high scoring teams as well. That means you have to get the teams and drivers right for those extra few points. And it means driver of the day and fastest lap are so crucial at 10 points. Now, driver of the day for me is mainly against 2 drivers, and it's Norris. He's looking the closest to Max Verstappen, and if he comes second again in Monaco or first place, he probably will get it. And then again you have Charles Leclerc, who I also think if he gets on the podium at his home Grand Prix, very much could easily get driver of the day as well. Now, you could also see Piastri and Sainz doing well, depending on where the McLarens and Ferraris are, so they could get driver of the day as well. But I think that is why I'm pushing for a 2 premium driver route for Monaco, as it gives you more chance to get that driver of the day and fastest lap, which are so important. As we saw in Imola, Norris got more points than anyone else, even Verstappen, because he got driver of the day and got 37 points to Verstappen's 35. Now with fastest lap, it's a little bit more complicated because of course George Russell got it in the Mercedes last weekend, and it's a bit of a hit or miss roulette wheel to who's going to get it. It really depends on where the gaps are. So for that one, it is just, again, try to have 2 premium drivers and just hope one of them gets the fastest lap. That's really the only thing you can do when it comes to fastest lap. Now, the best driver for under 7.5 million, which is the battle between Bottas, Sargent and Zhou, I would put my order as Sargent as the worst option this weekend, Zhou as the second best, and Bottas as first. Because like I keep saying, qualifying will actually be key, because we'll need those extra few points. And Bottas hasn't been perfect in qualifying, but he's 100% better than Zhou and Sargent are. Now, normally, like I said, I love Sargent because when he comes 20th and just stays out of trouble, he can just get you a few points and stay out of trouble. Now, of course, he didn't set a lap last weekend, getting a -5, which is why he ended up in the negative points, but he would have actually been a decent option if that didn't happen to him last weekend. And I still think P20's okay in Monaco. I really do think Bottas, who has a better chance of getting in to the final part of qualifying, is the better option of all 3 of them. Again, Zhou, he'll probably be finishing around 14th, 15th, not bad, but could get negative, could get positive. It could go either way for that driver. So Bottas would be my option for under 7.5 million. But again, if you can't afford anyone else in Sargent, it's not a bad option, and same with Zhou. Now we move on to the best drivers for under 9 million. And these drivers are Albon, Gasly and Hulkenberg. For me, there's a clear winner with these drivers, which is Hulkenberg. We know he can get into the final part of qualifying. He's so good in quali. Normally, that's a bit detrimental in F1 Fantasy, but like I keep on saying, qualifying in Monaco is so important. If he can just get into the top 10, he should get you a few points in the race for finishing P10 or above and getting a few points in qualifying for finishing P10 or above. And that's all you can really hope for in Monaco. Maybe 1 or 2 overtakes, maybe 1 or 2 positions gained, but unless there's a safety car, torrential rain, we're not going to be seeing that much action. Now with Albon again is the clear loser. Gasly can do okay in qualifying and can do better in the races, considering just how bad that Williams looks. I would steer clear of Albon. He had issues in Imola. I could see one of the Williams having issues again. They just can't get that car right this season. So be careful if you have to pick Williams. So my list for under 9 million would be Hulkenberg best driver, Gasly second, and Albon third. Now, for drivers under 10 million, which is the rest of the cheap drivers. Now, I think all of these drivers are worth talking about, bar one, under 10 million, from 10 million to 9 million. And I think Yuki Tsunoda still is the best option. Again, like I can't stop reiterating, qualifying, we know he's good at. He's the most likely out of all of these drivers to get into the top 10 for Monaco. And then once you're in the top 10 in Monaco, it's kind of hard to not stay there unless you really screw up the strategy. However, I also think with Ocon, now the Alpine probably won't be as good as it was last year here. Obviously, he got P3. However, I still think Ocon is a decent shout. He's not as good as Yuki Tsunoda, but still, if I saw him in a team, I wouldn't say it was a bad option. Then again, for Magnussen, I think he is one of the only drivers who can overtake at Monaco. And even though he's bad at qualifying, so he normally wouldn't fit the Monaco F1 Fantasy way of life, if he can get those overtakes off, he's still a decent option, but I still think he's a worse option than Tsunoda and Gasly just for this race. However, for later races, we've seen Magnussen is very good as he can get a lot of overtakes and position gained points. Then we move on to Ricciardo, and I think it's just a steer clear of him at all costs. Daniel Ricciardo, his qualifying's not been great so far this season, and when you've got Tsunoda at basically the same price, it's a no-brainer, considering you'll probably only have one of these drivers from 10 to 9 million in your team. Then I've got a whole extra subcategory for this driver I'm about to talk about, and that is Lance Stroll, because normally for a few teams and most teams, I would say Lance Stroll is a decent option. However, again, because of his qualifying and because of how difficult it is to overtake, I don't think Lance Stroll is a better option than Yuki Tsunoda or Nico Hulkenberg or Esteban Ocon or Pierre Gasly. I all think they could outperform him in qualifying, even with Aston Martin bringing upgrades, unless the Aston Martin upgrades look really good, then I would change my mind on Lance Stroll. So keep an eye on that for practice. However, unless Aston Martin look like they have Mercedes type pace again for 6th and 7th, I would steer clear of Lance Stroll, as I can't see him getting that 0.5 million extra for this weekend. Then moving on to the premium drivers, excluding Verstappen, I think we'll start off with Perez, who again is a big no. We saw in Imola, he had a bit of dip in form, coming P11 in qualifying and only P8 in the race. So it was okay, but we saw he really suffered on F1 Fantasy points for that. And again, last season in Monaco, he qualified P20, which was just terrible. And if he can't get his act together for this race, he will have the same issues as everyone else, because you can't overtake at Monaco. He may get 1 or 2 overtakes, but that will be about it. He won't get into the points if he has a bad qualifying. And I still think a good qualifying for Perez is P6 at the minute, behind both Ferraris and McLarens and Verstappen. And I think when you've got better options like Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, Piastri, Verstappen, all there, I think he is just the biggest driver to steer clear of for now, especially as this is the point of the season where last year Perez's performance just dropped off a cliff. Now again with the Mercedes, I'd say steer clear of them like usual. I think Russell did get lucky to get the fastest lap because he just had that extra room behind Perez, but Perez got stuck behind other drivers early on. But I think unless that happens again and they get super lucky with the fastest lap, they don't get you enough points and they're too expensive for what they give you. And then we are left with the 4 premium drivers that I really enjoy. I really do think it depends on your team value who you pick from here. I think if you had Norris last weekend, you stick with Norris and keep Sainz or Piastri. If you had Leclerc last weekend, you stick with Leclerc and you go with Piastri. Probably not Leclerc and Sainz, however, it's not a bad option. But I think all 4 of those drivers, if I saw in any of your teams, even Sainz and Piastri, I would say those are good options for Monaco. It really just depends on what your team value is saying and what those practice debriefs are saying on who looks fastest, Ferrari or McLaren. Because if McLaren look faster, obviously pick the McLaren drivers, and vice versa for Ferrari. Now, constructor-wise, I still think it's very much a three-way fight for Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari. I think if you pick any of those 3 constructors in any type of order, you will be fine. McLaren Ferrari builds fine, Red Bull Ferrari builds fine, Red Bull McLaren builds fine. All of what I just said would work out for you. Now, I do think there are better options, but I'll talk about that in the team selections. However, I do think Mercedes and Aston Martin, until they get their upgrades working, are no-goes. They're too expensive for what they give you, especially with Alonso looking terrible in Imola, Stroll looking okay, but still not fantastic. I just don't think it's worth it. And then you go on to the lower costing constructors, and I just don't think Haas and VCarb are worth it, especially this weekend, where normally you get most of their points from positions gained and overtakes made. However, this weekend in Monaco, I just don't see that happening. But now we move on to the team selections, and of course we have to start off with the McLaren Ferrari teams. Now, the minimum money you would need for a team that has McLaren and Ferrari in it would be 107.8 million, which would look like Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, Bottas, Sargent, Zhou, McLaren and Ferrari. Now, this team is okay. I wouldn't say it's bad, and I do think if you are on a tight budget because you haven't had the best start to the season, then this is no means a bad team. However, you can easily upgrade this if you have a bit more money, where you could upgrade Sainz to the Leclerc for 109.4 million, which I like to call the Leclerc family team, as you got Oscar Piastri and his dad as Charles Leclerc. That's the big news of this week in the F1 world. Because technically it's going to be Piastri's home Grand Prix as well now. But again, because I just think Leclerc home Grand Prix driver of the day potential is a little bit more than Sainz, and Leclerc's been getting more driver of the days in the season so far. And then if you have more money, you could go from Zhou to Hulkenberg for 109.9 million. And then you could go from Hulkenberg to Tsunoda for 111.2 million. And you could keep on going up with these teams. And then you could keep on going up with these teams with Bottas increasing up to the likes of Hulkenberg or Gasly if you have enough money. Or you can increase Leclerc to Norris if you have that money as well. However, that is for the very few who have over 113 plus million at the minute. And like I mentioned above, you could have that team with 114 million with Norris, Piastri, Tsunoda, Sargent, Bottas, McLaren and Ferrari. Then you move back on to the older teams that were the meta before, and we need to talk about the Verstappen teams, because I would still recommend the Verstappen teams if you wanted to play it safe, because we know he's going to win. However, we know he's not going to get driver of the day, and I doubt he's going to get fastest lap because we have other drivers pushing behind him. He no longer has those gaps to push for fastest lap. However, the cheapest option is at 109 million, again with Verstappen, both Saubers, both Williams, with Red Bull and Ferrari. Now, I wouldn't recommend actually using this team. If you have 109 million or anywhere close to 109 million, I would fully recommend the McLaren Ferrari builds, as they are better budget wise and they get you the same amount of points to the Verstappen team, so it's not really worth it. Again though, I do think it is worth looking at if you can have Verstappen, Hulkenberg, Tsunoda at 111 million with Sargent and Bottas with Red Bull and Ferrari, or Hulk and Gasly at 109.9. Those teams could work out for you. However, I still think they would play second fiddle to McLaren and Ferrari builds for now, especially at Monaco, where you want to spread your team out to try to get that fastest lap and just hope that Red Bull don't get fastest pit stops when you don't play a Red Bull Ferrari team. However, again, Red Bull Ferrari, very strong constructors. The two teams that are most likely to get the fastest pit stop points, which is an extra 18 points combined together. So by no means a bad shout if you want to play it safe with the Verstappen win. And then I think the final team variations you could use are again the single premium driver builds with two good constructors. However, you have the builds with Norris or Leclerc. I'll go through the Norris teams first. However, the Leclerc builds are exactly the same, just a bit cheaper, but I'll talk about that a bit later. And you can start off with the cheapest Norris build at 104 million with Lando Norris, both Williams, both Saubers with Red Bull and Ferrari. Now, again, if you have more money to play around with, you can upgrade Hulkenberg from Albon, and then you could upgrade Hulkenberg again to Tsunoda, and then if you have even more money, you could upgrade Zhou Guanyu to Hulkenberg, and then if you have even more money, you could upgrade Sargent to Gasly. And the same applies for the Leclerc teams. However, because he's cheaper than Norris, you can start off with these teams at around 101.2 million, and again you can follow the same layout as the Norris, Red Bull, Ferrari teams. However, just with Leclerc instead. And again, you can change these teams to be Red Bull, McLaren. However, I think when you're putting the extra money in to go from Red Bull, McLaren, I think then it's better off going with the McLaren, Ferrari teams or Verstappen, Red Bull, Ferrari. As if you have that extra money, you could probably use that extra money for better use. But I think those are the best options for team selections going into Monaco. Now, chips wise, I think again it's going to be quite chill on the chips. However, there are a few chips you can use. However, the chips I don't think you should be using, of course, are Limitless, Extra DRS or Autopilot. Again, like I've said, it's not a sprint race weekend. You should be using these on sprint race weekends. Now, No Negative is a decent option for this race. Again, I still think there's better options like Brazil, Kota, Qatar. I do think those are better options because they're sprint race weekends and they can still get lots of crashes. However, with Monaco, there could be a few crashes. It's not a bad place to use the No Negative by all means, but I just wouldn't put it out there saying you should use No Negative at the minute for Monaco. Then with Wildcard, I think only if your team is in a real dire situation do you need to wildcard this weekend, because like I said, Verstappen teams with Ferrari, Red Bull will score good. McLaren, Ferrari with two premium drivers will score good. Norris, Red Bull, Ferrari teams will score good. Leclerc, Ferrari, Red Bull teams will score good as well. So I really do think all of these teams are going to score similar points this weekend because of how low scoring Monaco will be. So I don't think it's worth using wildcard just for now, unless we see some drastic changes to team performances with a few upgrades coming in, which I'll talk about in a different video. But I think the only chip you should be looking at for Monaco is the final fix, because of, like I've said, with how important qualifying is, because once you're in the race, if you stick in first place, second place, third place, going into the first corner, you're most likely going to stick there for the rest of the race unless you screw up the strategy, unless it's a safety car. And so that means if you don't have someone like Norris, Piastri, Leclerc or Sainz, and they qualify on pole, I would highly recommend final fixing one of your premium drivers over to one of the four, whoever does the best. Again, vice versa, if you have one of those four, like Norris or Leclerc, and they only qualify 6th or 7th, and you see Piastri in second place, Sainz in pole position, Sainz in third, I'd recommend final fixing over to one of those drivers. So final fix could be very good this weekend, and I do think it will be all about the premium drivers for the final fix. And that is all that I have to talk about chips-wise for this video. Now for the league. Thank you all so much for joining. Like I said, we have 650 people in it at the minute. Here is a league code. I'll put it on the screen right now. And just thank you all so much for joining. And like usual, I'll give a top 5 shout outs. And the top 5 are as followed. We have #1paddock, here I come, sticking at first place with 1,957 points. Congratulations. We have Cultivates Flat Out, sorry for the pronunciation, at 1,940. Congratulations on second place. We have Pesa Racing 3, 1,924 points. Congratulations. Obi Guanyu Jobi down to 4th, however still very good at 1,911. And then again, sorry for pronunciation, it's either Viceroy 1 or Viceroy 1. Well done, 1,904 points. You all have over 1,900 points, which is incredible. That surely means all of you are above the top 80 in the global leagues. So very well done to all of you. And it's pretty close behind. So we've got a good little battle going on for the top 5. And remember, there is a £200 prize pool to be played around with. But anyway, that is all from me today. I hope you all enjoyed this video. And I'm hoping you all could have taken away something for F1 Fantasy for Monaco for your team selections, what chips to use, and who looks like the better options for drivers and constructors. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all for another F1 video later this week, and have a good rest of your week. Bye bye.